So we'll start by setting a positive motivation for our time. Generating the minds of confidence in the Buddhist teachings, and a mind of bodhicitta wanting to actualize the Buddhist teachings to be of greatest benefit to sentient beings. Wanting to complete the stages of the path, culminating in full enlightenment. Wanting to do that in order to have the ability to use the state of enlightenment to benefit countless sentient beings. All right. So I believe we're on day 80 today. Let's see. Yeah, because we, on day 79, last contemplation that we engaged in, we realized, or we contemplated that, so there were those three contemplations that kind of led us in a particular direction, understanding that with a perfect human rebirth, we have the capacity to create a variety of futures that could have one benefit or another, but among those options, aiming for enlightenment is the greatest possibility. And then the third contemplation was that in order to do that, we have to suffuse all of our activities with bodhicitta motivation. And now in day 80, or maybe we're on day 81, maybe we covered day 80. So day 81, so we're in the section now where we are talking about the challenges that are associated with creating the causes and conditions. And we've reached that analogy of the blind turtle that we introduced a little while ago, kind of extemporaneously, but it has greater meaning. It has more, we can go into the greater meaning that Lama Zopa gives to the analogy. So again, if you weren't here that day, the analogy that they give for trying to explain how difficult it is to create the karmic causes and conditions to achieve a rebirth, a human rebirth, with all of the 18 characteristics all at once. They talk about a golden ring being tossed into the ocean. The golden ring is slightly larger in diameter than the head of a blind sea turtle, which is also in the ocean. And in this, the way that Lama Zopa describes it, the turtle surfaces for a breath once every 100 years. And the probability of that turtle who isn't even able to make slight adjustment in his or her positioning being blind in order to navigate to a ring that's close to them, then the probability of that ring coming over the head of that blind turtle, the statistical likelihood of that, here he's saying, is even more likely that that could happen than we spontaneously take a rebirth, a perfect human rebirth from the lower realms. So there's various specific meaning to the elements of that story. Here he says that the ring signifies the teachings of the Buddha. The gold of the ring signifies their preciousness and the purity of the teachings. And we, the turtle, represents all sentient beings. And then the fact that the sea turtle spends 100 years, 99.99% of every 100 years at the bottom of the ocean signifies the fact that the karmic causes and conditions of a lower realm rebirth are infinitely more easy to create. And so mind's consciousness spends a lot of its time stuck in the lower realms. And then the blindness signifies ignorance of, here he says, Buddha Dharma. So that could be, we can look at that in different ways. Ignorance, here he says, blind to what is virtue and what is non-virtue. So ignorance of karma and its effects, but also fundamental ignorance, because that's also the teachings that overcome fundamental ignorance are part of the Buddha Dharma. So we can say there's conventional ignorance, ignorance of not understanding how cause and effect work, but also just the fundamental ignorance that's uprooted by the teachings. We're ignorant of all of that. So he says, just as the turtle swims helplessly around the vast ocean, the samsaric being constantly circles through the suffering realms. Only once in an inconceivably long period does the samsaric being happen to obtain an upper rebirth, symbolized by the turtle surfacing once every 100 years. So how rare it is that we can obtain not just human rebirth, but a rebirth with all the 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses. So, and again, the more optimistic spin on that is that this is talking about emerging from a lower realm rebirth, and that process being one that results in a perfect human rebirth, not having a perfect human rebirth and utilizing a perfect human rebirth with all of its freedoms and richnesses to then create the causes and the conditions of yet more perfect human rebirths. So there's a slightly more optimistic way of thinking about it than you might perceive from that story. If people can just make sure that they're muted. So day 82. Day 82 is kind of introducing that more optimistic view. In a way, Lama Zopa isn't, he's kind of, he likes to teach on the hell realms. So he frames it as only now do we have the chance to break free from this terrible cycle of suffering? And so, of course, we could just say now, but when he says only now, he's saying that you kind of do need a perfect human rebirth or quite close to it, because maybe there's things, if you're in a land, again, we talked about how some of the 18 qualities, we in our minds we can like, well, if I moved to Iran, then I still have the internet. But what if there was no internet? Or what if you were born in that country and you didn't move there, you didn't have that prior experience? So when they say, like a non-central land, it could be something that's different than our current way of thinking about a non-central land. So even though for us some of the 18 qualities seem mutable, they're not always as mutable as they might seem. So that some of this he actually talks about some of those Buddhist cosmological concepts that we've looked at a little bit here. The idea of, we talked a little bit about last time about the eons, and how there's, and he doesn't give years to this, and so because a great eon is different than a countless great eon, and then there's intermediate eons. So, like we said, a countless great eon involves the birth of a universe, the evolution of the universe, and the decay, and that process. So that's a countless great eon. It's comprised of 4 great eons, and each of the great eons are comprised of 20 intermediate eons. And they all, in the sutras, they have years associated with them, but they're not given here, and I don't know what they are. And so he says, during the great eons of evolution, decay, and emptiness, there is no Buddha-dharma at all. It can only exist during the eon of existence. And even then, the Buddha-dharma exists only for a short period of time. And we talked, there was a question about like, why, and I don't know why, but it has something to do with the karmic causes and conditions. And he says that we're at the very end of the existence of the Dharma. So I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of years that might be, but. And then there's another way of talking about the rarity of a perfect human rebirth. That one example, the analogy of the blind turtle, is a common example. And they also give other examples. So the next one is if you scrape your finger on the dirt, and then you look at the number of, you could say, I don't know, grains of dirt or even atoms of dirt, but then you compare that to the number of grains or atoms of dirt in the whole world, then the number under your fingernail is like the number of perfect human rebirths compared to the total number of sentient beings. And then there's another way of talking about there's another comparative example where they say, if you looked at the difference between the hungry ghost realm and the hell realm, if you looked at the number of beings in the hell realm compared to, because it's kind of like a graphic. If you were to look at a graphic of like all of the grains of sand on all of the beaches, and then you were to look at compared to a graphic of like all of the stars in the solar system or something, or in all of the solar systems. You'd have one large number compared to another large number, but one number would be so much larger than the other number, it would be like that there's almost nothing in this other graphic compared, these comparisons. So one way of thinking about it is that the number of beings in the hell, if you were to observe the number of beings in the hell realm compared to the number of beings in the hungry ghost realm, it would be almost as if there were no beings in the hungry ghost realm, because there are so many beings in the hell realm. But then if you looked at the number of beings, and then it gets progressively smaller, from there, that the number of the number of beings in the hungry ghost realm compared to the number of animals, there's so many more hungry ghosts than there are animals. And animals even include insects, and we know how many insects there are on just our planet. It's it's an incredibly huge number of just insects. I think the number of sentient beings on Earth are mostly insects, because there's mosquitoes and flies and just incredible numbers. Look at the rainforests and so on. And then compared to the human realm, the number of animals is so much greater than the number of humans, it's almost like there are no humans. But then when you compare the number of humans to the number of upper realm beings, it's almost like there are no upper realm beings. So it gets progressively smaller, but there's also no benefit to being in the upper realm. So it doesn't really matter, that once you get to that point. And then, of course, humans are a larger universe of sentient beings compared to humans with a perfect human rebirth. So it's even a smaller subset of just humans, because it's those 18 qualities which don't characterize a huge percentage of human rebirths. And then, of course, like he says, the sentient beings who have a perfect human rebirth are still subject to this sort of evolution, the karmic evolution of the universe, and how the causes and conditions for Bodhidharma to exist is quite narrow in time. So, yeah. So, again, the purpose of this section of Contemplations isn't to despair, it's not to freak out, it is to be motivated, to really take the essence of a perfect human rebirth. It is to recognize how incredibly rare and precious and difficult what we possess is, so that we will actually use it really well. Which is kind of what he says in day 83. He says, if our life lasted a long time and was always perfect, and if we could be assured of finding another good rebirth easily, then we could relax and think about practicing, in the future when better karmic, when better causes and conditions come together. But he says that's not true. Our life is short, and it starts to decay from the moment of birth. And we, so some of these contemplations we get to look forward to in death and impermanence. But, he says we can never tell when it will end. So children die, babies die, toddlers die, high school students die, college students die, people, I almost died. Just kidding. So, we never, our lifetime can end at any moment. He says, say we are a jewel thief looking for a priceless diamond, but the night is pitch black. Suddenly there's a lightning flash, and there on the road is the diamond. We have only a second to pick it up before it becomes too dark to see it again. Taking the essence of our life is like picking up that diamond, something we can do only in this lightning short life that we have. So let me pause. Any thoughts or questions that have come up about today's contemplations, or something that had been kicking around from a previous class?
Venerable Aaron has his hand raised.
Yep.
So I had kind of like two questions. One was, for last class, you had mentioned that we shouldn't aim for a pure land that has non-tantric practices. But my understanding was that certain pure lands we can use one to go to the ones that do. Like, for example, I believe Sukhavati was an example where that's more accessible. Is that a good idea or not a good idea?
That's too specific for me to get into. Lama Zopa's point generally is that when we pray, he does. I mean, he just always emphasizes that we should pray for a pure land where the tantric teachings exist. If we're going to go ahead and make a prayer or make a dedication, that it's better to phrase it like that. So yeah, that's all. I mean, that's all I can say is that that's how he phrases it. He encourages us to always couch it in that way. And then the karmic causes, we never know exactly how that will ripen. It could still ripen in a really beneficial way. But we shouldn't intentionally aim for, well, I don't know. I mean, he says that it's really important when we make prayers. All I can tell you is that, he says it's really important that when we make prayers to take rebirth in a pure land, that we include the thought that we want the tantric teachings to be available. And maybe, that would create a connection in some way that we can't foresee or we don't understand that would be beneficial.
My other question was that I was under the assumption that time was kind of relative for certain types of beings in the various realms. So, for example, the time for me is shorter than, let's say, a God realm's times as well, besides it being longer for them, like in general, like them living a long time, but their experience of time is also much, much longer from our experience of time. And that's why it's so hellish for things like pretas and things like that, because their time is shorter, but it's a lot of pain and suffering in those short moments.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
I don't know. I mean, I know that they, of course, I think if you're because of course, like I don't know exactly all of the different ways of talking about the eons and so on, but of course, in the hell realms, it's presented as very long lives, and in the upper realms, one way of talking about those are long-lived gods. So I know that in the extremes of the upper realms and hell realms, they talk about that as being very long. And then, of course, it's also true. So the pretas, I'm not sure how they describe the length of their lifetime, but definitely for the hell beings, not only is it very long, but the intensity of the suffering, just like for us, time passes subjectively more slowly when we're suffering, and it passes subjectively more quickly when we are happy and things are going well. So I'm sure that subjectively that is true, that they also want it to be even faster than it objectively is because of the painful conditions. And then in the situation of the long-lived long-lived gods. Although it's true that for the overwhelming majority of their time, that it's very blissful and so on, during the death process, they start to lose the qualities of their body, and there's a degeneration that happens just like it does for humans. You could, when the body becomes more frail and desiccated, and as the death process is unfolding, that there's a similar process for the long-lived gods, and they experience that as incredibly distressing and painful, the falling away of the causes and conditions, because they also they begin to recognize that their next rebirth will be of greater suffering. So, because there's nowhere higher to go, it's only lower options. So, but yeah, I don't know specific numbers of that. And of course, in the animal realm, it's incredibly varied. Those are generally pretty short, but. Any other questions? So then with day 84, we have Lama Yeshe kind of being a bit of a bummer. Usually it's Lama Zopa who we have to, usually Lama Yeshe is like, oh, you've got so much potential and everything is, but here he's kind of throwing a little bit of cold water on things and trying to wake us up. By doing that, again, whenever we see things like this in the teachings, it's not to be negative, it's not to be, but it's to kind of shake us a little bit, and to help us to recalibrate and really put our time and our attention on what's important. So he says, since we were born, we've wasted practically every moment of every day, month, and year. And this is a contemplation that you find in the 9-point meditation on death, where we have to think about the fact that, as a young child, we played, and just kind of we learned how to tie our shoes, and but didn't do much as a young child. And then as an older child, again, we were focused on middle school and high school, and we started to think about our career and what we wanted to do. That became kind of important. So, and then when we were in college or learning a trade or whatever, then that became the focus of things. And we started to think about money and a mortgage and children and family. And so if we think about, over the course of our lives, if we think about how many minutes, how many hours that we've really tried to learn about the teachings, recollect the teachings, put the teachings into practice, compared to the total number of, and of course we spend 30-40% of our lives asleep, so, and that's going to be true even if we become a really serious practitioner. We still, and that's of course why they talk about like dream yoga and other things. Like, there are ways of making use of that, but they're very advanced practices. But he says, even though we might say that we're following a spiritual path or leading a meditator's life, we're not serious. It doesn't matter if we sit in meditation, go to church or temple, or do any other kind of customary activity. That he says that doesn't mean anything. The actions that we need to do are those that actually lead us to everlasting, peaceful happiness, not those that simply bring up and down transitory pleasure. He says, check up. We might think we're doing something spiritual, but is our polluted mind simply dreaming? So it's, because again, the Buddhist path is, probably the most difficult. To me, it seems like the most difficult thing a person can do, because at its core, it's about confronting and overcoming the mind of self-cherishing, the egoistic self-concern, in a really fundamental way. And when we look at the law of karma, and it's not, we often think of our actions being harmful or beneficial when we're with other people, when other people are noticing what we're doing. We don't really think about, my relationship to, my food in the morning when I'm by myself, or my relationship to how I'm driving in a car by myself and thinking about the people around me or what I'm doing with my mind. But Buddhism is about what we're actually doing with our mind every conscious moment, not just, it's of course important to think about not hitting, not stealing, not actually engaging in overt harmful actions, but ultimately those are just a way of training. That's a preliminary way of training, and what it's getting at is that everything that we think and say and do from the moment that we wake up until the moment we go to sleep is relevant. And Venerable Rabina says, is programming our mind. Every single second, every millisecond of every moment is programming what is going into the mind. And when we really think about how overwhelming that is, it's probably the most challenging philosophical system that there is in our world. I don't know of any other philosophical system that gives people a more daunting task than truly overcoming self-grasping, self-cherishing. No other philosophical system is attempting anything like that. So, yeah, it's and again, it's not to beat ourselves up or to be depressed about it, but it's just to be realistic. He's saying check up, really, that the purpose of being, like Andi was saying, the purpose of being an inner being. I guess Buddhism, Buddhism was originally called, Buddhists were originally called inner beings. So it's to look inward and to really become aware of the mind, become aware of what is happening in the mind, and not to think, oh, well, yeah, it's fine that I engaged in all of this negativity and it's unchecked, but because I went to a teaching, of course we go to that the going to teachings and all of that, the purpose of that is to apply it. And so that's why it's the most challenging kind of task that we can think about is, am I actually putting everything that I'm learning into practice as best I can, day by day, creating, day by day by day, creating karmic causes and conditions for things to change, for things to improve. Any questions or thoughts about that?
Venerable, I just have an encouragement for myself and anyone else, that it's definitely the most challenging part of my life, but it has also been the most rewarding part of my life as a result, because of gaining insights to the things that I think about and how to change them and why I want to change them and the results in having changed them. So yeah, it's not easy, and there's part of it, of the whole tantric aspect, in transforming into a state, the yidam state, that acts sometimes as a tool, to kind of remind myself of who I am, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, I mean, it's challenging. It's also very fascinating, and our mind is, well, I'll never get to the root of it, but it's quite a journey. So I don't want to be discouraged by those words, but I certainly understand their severity at the same time.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So yeah, it's also, the way that I also look at it too is to think that Buddhism is also presenting us with the most optimistic picture that exists on our planet. It's challenging, but what they're suggesting, like what Cameron's saying about our potential, about our capacity, is also something that doesn't exist in any other philosophical tradition on our planet. The view of what we are capable of accomplishing is also unique. So, because all of the other concepts are just, well, maybe we can party, forever. But we're still like, we're stuck kind of thinking of ourselves as who we like with our name and our level of knowledge, and and I would, to some degree, our limitations, because all of the other systems that exist, they would say, well, you can't aspire to anything beyond that, which sounds really unpleasant. To me personally, I wouldn't want to just be able to accomplish that kind of goal. For me personally, that's not interesting. That's not pleasant to think about. And that's kind of all of the other statements that are available to us have a very kind of dim view of our potential. But Buddhism, the view is incredibly expansive, of what this results in. And then, of course, like we said, in terms of the tantric, because again, this is Lamrim Year, and Lamrim is about the sutra teachings, and so it's not really going to bring hardly anything into it about the Vajrayana teachings, but they do also exist. And so, of course, from that perspective, we can achieve that in a reasonably short period of time with the right causes and conditions and circumstances coming together and putting in effort. Like we said, a maximum of 14 lifetimes. If a person really practices sincerely, then it's such a powerful system of meditation that we can put a complete end to suffering in a relatively short period of time. So, and I said that it's not brought in, but even on day 85, he talks about Milarepa, and Milarepa was, he achieved enlightenment in one lifetime because of Vajrayana practice. It wasn't because he was following simply the sutra path. It was because he doesn't address that specifically here, but he says because of this he was able to attain enlightenment in one brief lifetime. So Milarepa engaged in a lot of incredibly negative karmic actions as a young person, and due to fear, which is again kind of why we need to confront the less rosy parts of the picture, but he was motivated out of genuine concern for his karmic actions. But still, even in the time that he had left in that one lifetime, due to the power, the incredible power of the Vajrayana system of meditation, he achieved perfect, complete enlightenment. And when they say, we said in one lifetime means that there are no karmic causes from past lives. So, we probably are even benefiting from those previous lives, karmic causes and conditions. And he's saying, there's nothing different about Milarepa's body or mind, or you could say Shakyamuni's body or mind, or Lama Tsongkhapa's body and mind. They all had the same body and mind that we have, and they used that to achieve enlightenment in one lifetime very quickly. So in day 86, will be the last contemplation. We'll end on a little bit, again, try to end on lighter notes or more optimistic contemplations. So he says, there will never come a time when the conditions are better for Dharma practice than right now, than in this moment. So this is encouraging us to use these contemplations to turn away from the idea that we should wait, that we should be like, because again, that's this kind of procrastinating mind is quite common, and we think, oh well, when the kids move out, or when this project is over, or when this job isn't the best job, but maybe this other job I'm thinking about trying to get, and when that happens, then that'll be the right time. But if we think about that tendency that we have, if we really just think, because it's not like today we had that tendency and we never had it before. We've had it probably for our, in various ways. We all struggle with procrastination. And if we think about that mind and how deceptive it is, we can recognize that we've used exactly that way of thinking, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, about things that have already happened. We thought, 10 years ago, we thought, oh, well, when this happens, and then that happened, and we can recognize, well, that happened, and I still had a mind of pushing it still out into the future. So if we don't just kind of bite the bullet and decide that, today is the day that I need to really start making a strong effort, because there isn't something about, the 18 freedoms, they don't say, and you have a job that is only 20 hours a week, or, and they say, you've lived at a time when the Buddha has come and taught, the teachings exist, the 18 qualities are there, they're there right now. So, yeah. He says it's the time to have huge thoughts. It's the time to make vast plans, to lay out the immense project ahead of us and feel happy that we can achieve our goal of developing ourselves. We have perfect role models in the Buddha and the numberless great yogis that followed him, as well as the precious lamas that we have the fortune to take teaching and gain inspiration from. And we know that we have exactly the same potential as they do. Shakyamuni was once like us, His Holiness was once like us. In turn, we can be exactly like them. All the conditions are there. What we need is the determination to do it. So it's not about, waiting for some kind of mythical, perfect opportunity. That perfect opportunity is already present. It already characterizes our lives. We're just kind of making up excuses for why something else needs to be there. Some other cause or condition needs to be in place. And the problem is that that could happen, and still there's going to yet be another one that we will imagine needs to be there. Because it's just sort of the path of least resistance. The mind is accustomed to not engaging in serious, determined, consistent practice, and so there's a inertia that we have to overcome. So we just decide, as he says, make plans, actually think about, just like if you were going to think about, having a new career, becoming a doctor. You'd be like, okay, well, I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm 60, but if I was going to decide to become a physician, how would I do that? Well, I'd have to do this, and I'd have to do that, and I'd need a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan. And so it's the same way. Like, we're not going to tomorrow start meditating 3 hours a day. We may never meditate 3 hours a day, but maybe on the weekends we can do a bit more. We can maybe think about using vacation time to do 2 or 3 days of longer retreats, or a week here and there. But we need to start thinking about, well, where are those retreats? What is reasonable? How do I afford, to do a 2 or 3 day retreat? How do I have the funds available to do that? And how, if I want to get to a point where, maybe an hour of meditation per day is doable, I realize I have to start, if I'm not meditating at all, then I have to start with 10 minutes, once a day. But then I need to think about having a plan, and that plan, we've kind of said before in various classes, that you don't have an arbitrary plan in terms of meditation. You don't say, okay, well, for 1 month, I'm going to do 10 minutes a day, and then the next month I'm going to do 10 minutes twice a day, and then the month after that I'm going to do 10 minutes 3 times. You don't make an arbitrary plan. You have to base it on how things are actually going for you. So you don't want to have this rigid, inflexible, arbitrary idea of what progress looks like, but you also don't want to abandon the idea of progress. You don't want to think, oh, well, if I'm meditating for 10 minutes a day today, then in 3 years, if I'm still meditating 10 minutes a day, that's ideal. That's not ideal to only be meditating 10 minutes a day every day over the course of multiple years. You want to think about, in 5 years, there should be a change. There should be progress made. And so you need to be reflecting month by month, or 2 months by 2 months, or 3 months by 3 months, reflecting on how things are going. But write it down. Actually, don't just leave it up to chance. Don't just be willy-nilly about it. Take it seriously and think about, how are your sessions of meditation going? How are you noticing that the distractions are less frequent, that they're less intense, that they're shorter in duration? Are you seeing those signs? Are you noticing that you are happier about the idea of meditating than you used to be? Like, because it was maybe a chore. It seemed like a chore kind of at the beginning. Is that changing? Is that, are you making progress? And do you feel energized to do your practice? And then, and of course, working through these things with a teacher, with a Geshe, with someone, that's also quite helpful, getting feedback and that sort of thing. But yeah, so we want to really think about having a way, thinking about, okay, I'm choosing, I am going to meditate on the Lamrim. I am going to do one contemplation every single day on the Lamrim. So we make these decisions, we make these plans, and we think about our week, like, okay, I'm gonna include some meditations on, the breath or visualizing the Buddha to kind of train in meditative stabilization. I'm going to, so it's just to think about it as a real, if we want to create the causes and conditions, it isn't some sort of pie in the sky kind of nebulous concept. It's exactly the same as we would approach any of our goals. Like, if I want to buy a house in 10 years, what are the things, how do I get there? And then we break it down and we make plans and we put these plans into practice. So if our job is to achieve enlightenment, then what does that mean? What are the realizations that have to happen? How do we train in calm abiding? Like Yeshe Zopa is going to be, teaching us about next month, and to create the kind of mind that can achieve realizations, and what are the parts, and then how do I begin to implement those, slowly, gradually over time, and then how do I do that? Like I said, how do I do that in a reasonable, useful, constructive way, so that I don't burn out, so that I don't get overwhelmed, because we also have to take care of ourselves. It isn't just flipping on a light switch and going from 0 to 100, but if 100 is the end point and 0 is the beginning point, how do I go to 1 to 2 to 3, so that we end up at 100 at some point in the future. And then, of course, at the same time, not being unrealistic and thinking, oh, I definitely will. So, we also have to be realistic about those goals. Of course, he's saying have vast. So we want to have the goal of achieving enlightenment, but we don't want to think that it will definitely happen in a year, or it will definitely happen in 10 years. We want to have a view of, a long-term view, think of it in a realistic way, but still, am I making progress? Am I doing what needs to be done to make progress? And then, but not clinging to it in a tight way where we think, oh, I'm not making enough progress. Oh, this isn't, this is going too slowly. Because we also have to have the view that it may not happen in this lifetime. And so we're using this lifetime to create as many karmic causes and conditions for it to ripen as we possibly can, but without being uptight and clinging and thinking that it must only take a certain amount of years, or or I failed, or things are terrible. We want to keep a light, joyful mind as we are doing that, but also just, recognizing that no one else is going to help us to think through what we need to do. No one else is going to, help us to think about our day and when is the best time for me to meditate. How do I create space for my practice? Those are things that we do need to think about. And if we never think about them, we shouldn't be surprised that we don't start and that we're not consistent. So there's a balance between being practical and making plans, and then at the same time having those plans be flexible and not grasping at them as something that is in an unrealistic way. Any thoughts or questions?
Venerable, it seems that for the most part, it's a pretty balanced life as far as the Dharma goes for me, and I'm really grateful for that. But there are times when I'm I'm full, and I guess I'm asking you a personal question. When you just want to vegetate, do you decide to vegetate mindfully, or do you just say, "Oh man, I just have to vegetate"?
So I think it's, of course, I think it's something that changes. All of these things, of course, are things that change over time. None of, of course, no one can just push and push, and, because there's formal practice and informal practice, and, we have to give ourselves space to organically grow, and not feel like it has to be pushing and tight, and because then the mind gets disturbed. And so we do have to strike a balance in our daily lives. And there's better, but of course there's better ways of doing that. There's worse, there's less constructive and more constructive ways of doing that. But when we do it in a less constructive way, we also recognize that that's just kind of where we are right now, and that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you could say that maybe trying to be out in nature is a little bit better than like a violent movie or something. Not that you grab or even just like a soap opera kind of movie or any so giving yourself kind of a peaceful kind of disconnect, or there's ways of doing that are because when we're out in nature, you could recite mantra for the benefit of the beings around you. So I think we do need to recognize when we're overwhelmed or overstimulated or feeling uptight, and we need to do things about that, and that's certainly fine. And then we can also kind of think about, what do we turn to? What serves that goal for us? What are we gravitating toward? And could we think about sometimes experimenting with like a 10-minute breathing meditation, because that's not heavy, it's not the hell realms, it's not, could we just think about, or visualizing the Buddha, or those are all restorative, peaceful, or mantra practice, or like I said, just trying to be out in nature. Can we think of, and just experiment, I would say it's about kind of developing the inner the habit of thinking about, of recognizing, okay, I am feeling overwhelmed, I am feeling uptight, and then trying to think about, well, where does my mind go when that happens? Does it go to food? Does it go to the television? Does it go, where is it? What's coming up in my mind about what is going to relieve that? And then trying to experiment with maybe something else that could also be, that could serve that role. And then, but, also thinking about, that if we're with, if we're going to watch a movie with someone, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or we're going to meet friends for lunch, but we think about that the real purpose of that is connecting, with other people. It isn't that we're just zoning out, or, the real purpose of that is to be nourished by making a connection with other people. And that's wonderful. I got to strengthen my friendships. I got to strengthen my bond with people in my life. And that's a very useful thing to do, because then we also think about, when we're practicing, we bring those people to mind and we think, oh, due to my karmic connection with them, may I lead them to enlightenment. May I be the one that, manifests enlightenment. And when I manifest enlightenment, may they be among my first circle of disciples that I lead to enlightenment at that in my last lifetime, due to the strength of my karmic connection with them. So yeah, I think that it's just kind of about trying to pick the most beneficial ways of creating space in the mind.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, so we're out of time for today, and we'll resume at our normal time on Thursday. So let's dedicate, so we recollect our altruistic motivation and think that by having listened and participated, we've actualized that motivation, created positive energy in the mind. We offer that positive energy for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception. And may it ripen in whatever way is truly beneficial for sentient beings. Visualizing strongly that it ripens in incredibly vast, useful, constructive ways. Creating the causes and conditions for all sentient beings to be completely free of suffering and to have ultimate, lasting, perfect happiness. All right. So then too, to just briefly, like when we do go, like if the mind does go to food or something, at least we can offer that, we can offer the food that we're really gravitating toward eating. We can at least turn that into an offering practice, where we can think, oh, I really want to, watch this TV show, but we can think or I really need to take a nap. But we can at least offer that. We can think, I'm doing this to create space in the mind so that I have energy for my practice. So even if it's not like a spiritual object that we are gravitating to, at least we can try to turn that into an offering and think it's serving the purpose of giving me space in my mind so that I'm energized for my practice later. It's another way of thinking about it.
Great. Thanks.
All
I
right.
really like that.
Have a great night, and I'll see everybody on Thursday.